I am here to talk to you about rebel talent. And I would like to start by asking you to think about the type of words that come to mind when you think about the rebels in your organizations. Now, this is a question that I love to often ask whenever I talk to people like you or whenever I'm spending time in organizations. And it's interesting to see the type of words that usually come to mind. So there are the outcast, the troublemakers. Sometimes I hear words like criminals. Can you please show them the door? They are annoying. They should be punished. Now, what I want to do in the time that we have together is try to give you a new perspective on who the rebels are in organizations, at least in the way I think about them, as I think about them agents of positive change, people who can really bring about a lot of innovation, but doing something a little bit differently. What is interesting is that we can go back to a company like Pixar, and they embrace disagreement. In fact, they've done a lot of interesting activities around the fact of bringing tension and conflict out so as to improve what's going on with producing their movies as well as life at work. In fact, you might have heard about the really interesting initiative of having a notes day, where basically people go to work and they don't do what they're usually doing, but they spend time thinking through what's not going well in the organization, in their team, in their jobs. And then they write notes about just that, they share them with others, and then they figure out how to make the organization better. This is just one of the ways in which tension and conflict is created so as to make the decision-making process better, and in the end, the outcomes that the organization is interested in also better. Now, what is interesting is that that's very different from what we all enjoy. Think about conflict. That's usually the way we try to face it. We avoid it altogether. And having disagreements just makes us uncomfortable. We love people who look like us, and we rather move away from tension and conflict since we think that is not an important part of the process. And I would argue that rebels are fighting against this national tendency of avoiding conflict, of avoiding tension, and instead they embrace it, the same way that you see Pixar animators and producers do. Now, one way in which we can embrace conflict is by bringing in multiple perspectives. I'd like you to think about a current decision you faced, whether at work or in your life. If I were to guess, the way you approached it is by asking the question, what should I do? And as it turns out, that's the wrong way of approaching the question, even if it comes natural to us. And it's the wrong way because it focuses our attention on our own view and is usually just one view. What we should be doing instead is embracing other perspectives. And for doing that, we need to ask the question a little bit differently. Rather than saying, what should I do? We should be asking, what could I do? Just that little shift allows us to bring multiple perspectives, create tension, create conflict, but in a way that can be productive and helpful to our own engagement. Now, I would like to stop thinking about conflict for a second. I'd like you to engage in a little exercise. We talked about the importance of reflection, so I'd like you to take a piece of paper and write down the answer to a few questions. I'm going to give you 4 dimensions, and for each of them, I would like you to think about who's in this room and rank yourself against them. So let's imagine that I'm giving you one dimension. If you think that on that particular dimension you're the best person in the room, you're going to write down 100%. If you think you're the worst person in the room, it's a 0. And if you think you're somewhere in between, you can choose a number between 0 and 100%. Your ability to make a decision is the first dimension I'd like you to rank yourself on. The second dimension is your ability to get along well with other people. The third dimension is your ability to negotiate effectively. And finally, why not your honesty? You've all done the math? Yeah? As I said, the numbers are yours, but if you don't mind, just out of curiosity, if the average number that you wrote down on the piece of paper is a number bigger than 50, 50, just raise your hand up high so I can see it. See, that's why I love the idea of spending time with you this morning. This is fantastic. That basically we got, I think, 99% of the room having numbers above 50. We just proved a mathematical impossibility in this very room. Now, we're doing this exercise not to make fun of each other, but to point to a natural tendency that we all have, which is to think very highly of ourselves. In fact, I could have picked whatever dimension and we would have seen the same results. To convince you, I want to bring some data into the picture and tell you about a survey that was conducted back in 1996 on 1,000 Americans. They were asked a slightly different question. And the question was, who's likely to get into heaven? And they were ranking a bunch of people, one of which was Bill Clinton. Didn't do so well at the time. I remember this is 1996. Another person was Michael Jordan, who did a little bit better. Mother Teresa, interestingly enough, got a 79% chance of getting into heaven. We have high standards. That's not a bad thing, I would say. But the reason why I'm mentioning this data to you is that there was another category of people who did even better than Mother Teresa, and that was the respondent themselves, with an 87% chance of getting into heaven. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to summarize it for you with a picture. This is what we do. This is our own natural tendency. And so when we are at work with others in meetings, we fall in love with our own perspective. We fall in love with our own view, and that makes it difficult for us to embrace conflict. What rebels do that it's different from what most people do, they embrace different perspective. They embrace diversity of opinions. They fight against this very natural tendency to go and stay narrowly focused on our own view, and also, if we open up, to go with people who are very much like us.